You're right, it is kind of strange having people far away from you.
Yeah.
It is
All right, so now we're going to hear from Erek Nass. He lives and works in Columbus, Ohio at CCAD in Roto.
Yep.
Roto.
Yeah.
I always think Roto Rooter, and that's so wrong, but it's probably kind of similar.
Yeah. Conduits of knowledge.
Yeah, so we're going to hear from him about descent, which is this piece.
So, my name is Eric. Trying to figure out what door to enter on this. I was thinking back, so when I found out about the show a year ago, I just heard Kelly Reichardt speak, filmmaker. She did Wendy and Lucy, she did Certain Women. She was speaking at the Wexner, and one of the things she said was the creative process is a simultaneous process of gaining and losing something at the same time. And often I deal with binaries, polarities, opposites happening simultaneously. So it kind of struck a chord with me, and it became the first statement in my artist statement. So often I'll deal with kind of using scientific inquiry or methods of looking at what I call converging contrasts. So thinking about exterior, interior, above, below, empty, full. And I think about these things happening at the same time. And often I'll look at them in a way of through symmetry or through a macro lens or a telephoto lens, underwater. And then I'll start to layer them in a way that kind of gives you a common everyday occurrence, but in a new way. And so for this one, I thought a lot about this idea of enduring loss and this idea of moments where you feel like you're being pulled downward, and how do you respond to that situation. And so I thought of this idea of, I always had this, as a kid, this fear of drowning. And actually a very personal, a very specific moment that caused that was this, I was like 6 years old, and this little girl, Libby, had a crush on me. And she thought it'd be funny if she stuck my head under the water at the pool. And I just remember looking up and seeing light and feeling like I was gonna suffocate. But I didn't, and there was a moment where I just stopped panicking and just, she let go and I was able to come to the surface. And so it's thinking about that in terms of how do you deal with loss, how do you deal with pain. And I also return to this idea, it's called tragic optimism. It comes from Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust, wrote a book, and developed this line of psychotherapy called logotherapy, which is finding meaning in those times when there seems to be none. So it's something that often circulates in my head. And so that's kind of what my starting point for this. I initially had wanted this huge cabinet of small vapor boxes. I knew I was gonna be working with light and water vapor, but I'd wanted multiple boxes to create this, almost like this Wunderkammer, cabinet of curiosity. But the more I kind of refined the idea, the more I got to this idea of like a single screen in which the vapor would be trapped, but also moving around and venting out the bottom. So the image is always changing because of not only the source, but also because of the materiality of the water that's vapor in the screen. So I'm trying to think what else. The soundtrack is kind of a layered approach of the rumble is solar oscillation, so the sun's surface rumbling. And then the second layer, which is kind of the more kind of choral layer, is Vivaldi's Four Seasons, specifically winter, slowed down 85% and then recorded underwater to kind of give this kind of hollow choral sound. So that kind of is kind of an overview of this. Any questions?
I have a question. How much is process a part of like the exploration of materiality and the process important to the work?
It is really, really probably one of the primary motivations for me is exploring light and water. So often it's finding ways of looking at water as either like the lens of a camera, becomes an ice ball, becomes the lens of a camera, or it's exploring what water itself can do as a filter, and how it can kind of reflection or underneath water, what it can do to an image. And that's often where I'll start collecting materials throughout the year, and then I'll just start to dissect it, and it'll kind of lead me to a specific installation. So I start with either a photo or video that I take, and eventually it works itself into some sort of like installation.
Did this video have more than one take, or is this the...
It does. So this is Lake Michigan, summertime. This is like a middle of a cloudy afternoon. And I went back to this little beach in Wisconsin probably during the week, like every day. So sometimes at dusk, sometimes in the middle of the day, different times of the day, and would place this camera underwater for only a few minutes, but often I slow it down so it becomes, a few minutes becomes a half an hour.
And now it's on a loop of a few minutes? Or...
It is. I cut the half an hour down to 3 minutes.
For those attention spans?
Yes, yeah, attention spans. And also I like the moment where the camera comes out of the water. This moment was important to me. And so I wanted to make sure to get to that. I was a percussionist growing up, and so rhythm is really important to me, the rhythm of something. And the first time I watched this, it was at 18 minutes, and it just seemed too long. And so it felt like the rhythm needed to speed up a little bit. And then there's an exterior part that kind of relates. You can occasionally see the ripple of the exterior experiment will occasionally reflect up on the ceiling as well.
Okay. It's a lot clearer at night, but I'm surprised by how much you can actually see during the day.
Yeah.
So you also have this component over here with the water droplets. Does it actually move when the base is going?
It does. So, the comment about process, like often, I like the way water will also act as a magnifier, and when it's in a droplet form. And so I wanted to magnify a certain word, well, a word on that artist statement. And I also like the way it reacted to the base. So I tried to kind of engage all of the senses. So there's like oil in the water. There's a tactile component with just the base on touching that wooden place. Even sitting on the bench, you can feel the vibration. So scent, visual, touch, and then sound. So.
Are you ever going to make your kind of curiosity?
Yeah, actually, yeah. It's still in me. Like this didn't scratch the itch that I had for that. I thought it would, but it didn't.
What about the meditative quality? When you walk in here and sit down, like it's so almost spiritual, but especially meditative. So is that an effect that you want for your viewer, or is that something that happens naturally?
Yeah, it's something I think about without trying to put into words, because then it becomes something specific. But I do like that idea of internal space, turning inward. But I also like the idea of turning inward with people around you. This idea Olafur Eliasson talks about, shared situation. So these experiences that are with other people, and not just on our, by ourselves at home, but maybe like, because I'm an introvert, so often people confuse introversion with not liking to be around people. But that's not the case. It's where your energy goes. And so I like this idea of, that's why I put the bench in here, is a place for, quite often people are not going to share a bench with a stranger, but it's there if they want to.
You mentioned the Rothko Chapel, which I thought was a really nice sort of component, or like parallel to the work you're making, just like ideologically.
Yeah. I like this idea of a space that doesn't have a specific religion or philosophy attached to it, but a place that people can go. And I thought the Rothko Chapel is a place that kind of has that connotation.
I feel like this does too, in that like the content is pretty universal feeling. Like I think the maybe most concrete parallel could be like moonlight or something, which obviously everyone's experienced unless they're clones. But even then, I would imagine they have a similar experience in the two. But I think that that also creates sort of a neutral or non-denominational
Yeah.
feeling.
Yeah.
So a lot of your work in the time I've known you has dealt a little bit with distortion of the image, but this is probably the first time I've seen a more angular distortion with the way that the projection is kind of in a V shape. Maybe
Yeah.
I'm wrong, but you've done it before. Is that something that had to do with the constraints of the space and how you were displaying it, or what made you settle on that kind of popular distortion?
So initially, projectors often will have a keystoning, so they'll distort it, and you have to usually fix that distortion. But because I created an image that was symmetrical, I liked the fact that this it took the perfection away and made it more of an angular projection. So I actually played around with adjusting it so it'd be straight, but the more I did, the more I didn't respond to it. I liked the fact that you could see the angled light and distortion.
It really plays up the effect of the smoke and water as well.
Yeah. It also gives the illusion of a door that's been partially open with light behind it that gives that kind of that shadow. It gives that kind of angle, and I kind of liked what that did. Especially since this has a kind of the proportions of what could be a doorway, a window, a screen.
It's very mesmerizing.
Yeah, it has a really hypnotic quality to it. Like I think it's hard to think in words when you're looking at it because it's just so full of words. Does anyone else have questions?
No questions, Brian?
Brian, could you describe the process?
His process was called patience.
Give up the kitchen minutes.
Stations are for hard making.
All right.
Well,
Well, thank you.